following documentary is intended for mature audiences and some of the subjects contain content of a graphic nature. Times in Focus is not responsible for any insult or hurt that might cause offence. All of the following you're about to see has been extensively researched.
I committed to the British people that I would renegotiate our position in the European Union and hold an in-out referendum. Now I'm delivering on that commitment.
In a world of infinite mirrors, we are all trapped within the reflections of our own making. The digital world, once a place for distant connection, has become the stage for a new kind of spectacle. A spectacle where everyone is both actor and audience. But something has changed in the way we see those who stand at the centre of this stage, the politicians, the celebrities, and the very people we once trusted to guide us.
In the shadows rise and find a voice. With every moment we can make the choice.
With the rise of social media, the public gained a new kind of power. The power to not just consume, but to create the narrative. It's a world where everyone can contribute to the story, and where the lines between admiration and vilification blur into one swirling, chaotic mess. In this new landscape, there is no longer a hierarchy of influence, no clear distinction between those who govern and those who follow. Politicians now perform, not just in the halls of power, but on Twitter feeds, Instagram stories, and TikTok clips. They must appeal not to a group of elites or intellectuals, but to a vast, chaotic crowd that lives in a world of instant gratification. In 2010, the world was recovering from the 2008 financial crash. A seismic event that shook the very foundations of global capitalism. David Cameron, the fresh-faced leader of the Conservative Party, offered a what some might say slick and polished image of modernity. Cameron stepped up, leading with a campaign that blended optimism with austerity. It was subtle. His rhetoric was sharp, filled with an idea of big society, a return to community values, yet wrapped in the language of freedom and individual responsibility. But lurking beneath the surface, the policies promised austerity, cuts to public services, all in the name of rebalancing the economy. Politics were fragmented. The Liberal Democrats, once seen as the voice of reason and moderation, were suddenly thrust into the spotlight, and they ended up forming a coalition with Cameron's Conservatives. The whole situation felt unstable, a fragile agreement that reflected the general mood of uncertainty in the country.
Democrats will meet from 11 a.m. today as they continue trying to thrash out a power-sharing deal.
Cameron's rise to power wasn't just about winning the election. It was about navigating a world that had lost its faith in traditional power structures. Cameron, with all his assurances and polished demeanour, became the figurehead of a new kind of political narrative, one that promised to restore Britain to its rightful place in the world. But it was built on the shaky ground of austerity and the deep fractures left by the economic collapse. In the years that followed, Cameron's leadership would be marked by contradictions, the rise of populism, and the disillusionment with the political establishment. The optimism he initially brought would slowly give way to the darker undercurrents of division, anger, and uncertainty that would come to define the next decade.
President Obama and I think we've got it slightly wrong, because I've given him a table tennis table and he's given me a barbecue. But when you see us standing next to each other, it is quite clear that the person who needs the exercise is the British Prime Minister, and the person who needs the barbecue is the President of the United States.
In a sense, Cameron was a product of the moment, the leader for a time that needed answers but couldn't find them. And then came along Brexit. Brexit wasn't considered just a question of whether to leave the European Union. It was a question of identity. It was about what it meant to be British in a world that felt increasingly fragmented.
I'd like to send my very best wishes to everyone observing the holy month of Ramadan. It's a hugely important time as Muslims in Britain and across the world mark the foundation of their faith. And as friends and families come together in contemplation and in fasting, we are reminded of those Muslim values, those British values of community, family and charity.
There were whispers of something darker underneath the surface, a feeling that the country was losing its grip on its history, its culture and its place in the world. Some people felt that the UK was losing control over its own laws, borders and policies due to EU membership.
Under the doctrine of state multiculturalism, we've encouraged different cultures to live separate lives apart from each other.
This was Luton this morning, the English Defence League staging the largest anti-Islamist demonstration in its short history.
6 in the morning, waiting at the bus stop. Minimum wage and maximum bullshit crop managed Steve.
One more thing. Please watch what you are watching on YouTube and social media. I've identified what I call the paper patriots. Their narrative is just to earn money and just promote negativity. We're a positive nation, we must remain positive, we must come together strong, hand in hand, black with white, white with black.
Come and join the People's Army. Let's topple the establishment who've led us to this mess.
They believed that EU regulations and laws, especially concerning immigration, trade and the economy, were imposed on the UK without sufficient say. The idea of taking back control was central to the Leave campaign.
System of capitalism's killing scheme.
The free movement of people within the EU allowed citizens of other EU countries to live and work in the UK. While some saw this as a benefit, others believed it led to increased pressure on public services, housing and jobs.
We all in this together still, despite what they want us to feel. Breaking down walls that divide. Time to put our pride aside.
Concerns over immigration were a significant factor in the Brexit debate, especially as the EU expanded to include countries with lower wages and higher emigration rates.
Till it's done.
Media try to split us apart, north and south like a broken heart. Rich man's game keep us in our place, but we share the same holds face to face. Through council flats to country homes, all of us got them similar groans. Bills to pay and dreams to chase, time to unite this with this faith.
Thoughts are there's been a shift in the last couple of weeks. That Leave has definitely had some momentum, but there's 8 days to go. 8 days is a hell of a long time.
Breaking down walls that
Tell me why the EU's a good thing. I want to hear why he loves the flag. I want him to tell me he stands to attention when he hears the anthem. He's welcoming a European army and, of course, as he has since 2005, Turkey as a member by 2025.
There were concerns that EU membership cost the UK a significant amount of money, contributing to the EU budget. Critics of the EU argued that the UK's financial contributions were not providing enough return, while others believed that the UK would be able to negotiate better trade deals independently outside the EU.
What happened to my Britain?
where old ways seem so free, remembering the days gone by, life as it used to be.
The EU has many regulations governing various aspects of trade, commerce and everyday life. Some businesses and individuals felt that the UK was being burdened by excessive red tape and regulation from Brussels. The desire to have more flexibility and fewer restrictions was a key factor for many Brexit supporters.
I'm starting this post.
But now the world has changed.
She's a British veteran.
The past seems
And
far
I've served
away.
this country.
Can we bring
I've
back
seen
the
shit.
golden days?
I'd like to forget, but it just doesn't
Britain
happen.
of yesterday.
It doesn't happen.
For some, leaving the EU was about reclaiming British identity and reducing the influence of foreign entities on national decisions.
Last year, 9 men were given jail sentences of up to 19 years for their part in a child sexual exploitation.
Life as it used to be.
This view was often tied to a sense of British exceptionalism and a desire to focus on UK interests rather than broader European integration. The rise of Euroscepticism in the UK, particularly among the Conservative Party and certain sections of the British public, contributed to the referendum. The political pressure to hold a referendum was partly driven by the need to address growing internal divisions within the Conservative Party and concerns over UK Independence Party, gaining support for its anti-EU stance.
To get Britain to leave the European Union, you all laughed at me. Well, I have to say, you're not laughing now, are you? And the reason you're so upset, the reason you're so angry, has been perfectly clear from all the angry exchanges this morning. You, as a political project, are in denial.
We shall be taking back control of our sovereignty.
Bring in Her Majesty. It's time to knight Mr. Farage. If you would like to kneel there.
Come on then. Don't hurt me. Well, thank you.
You are now Sir Nigel Farage. We're also making you Honorary British Ambassador to America and Honorary MP for South Thanet because they didn't elect you for real. So arise, Sir Nigel.
Thank you very much. I'm honoured.
My mummy says you hate foreigners.
No, little girl. No. You're not supposed to say that. That's very naughty. That's it, everyone.
Queen has to be non-political.
Nigel Farage has been knighted.
Under the leadership of Nigel Farage, UKIP became a significant political force. Farage's charismatic leadership and his ability to tap into public discontent over EU membership made him a prominent figure in British politics.
The point is, you're from an immigrant family and you're married to an immigrant. Why are you so against immigration when it works? Because we have to control it.
Besides its Euroscepticism, UKIP also embraced a range of right-wing and populist policies, including reducing immigration, reducing government regulation, and limiting the power of the political establishment.
I sometimes feel worried about you, Nigel Farage. The reason I feel worried is because I know a lot of people are frightened in our country. I know a lot of people are feeling afraid and frustrated.
This ultimately led to Nigel Farage distancing himself and finally leaving the party.
On a personal level, I feel slightly sad that it's happened, but frankly, the sooner this election's over with and UKIP closes down, the better it will be.
You may not have noticed that Nigel Farage has quit UKIP after 25 years. He said the party had become too fixated by the anti-Muslim policies of its leader, Gerard Batten,
The former English Defence League leader, Tommy Robinson, has been appointed as an advisor to the UKIP leader, Gerard Batten. The party said Mr Robinson, whose real name is Stephen Yaxley Lennon, will advise on rape gangs and on prison reform.
Supporters of Brexit argued that leaving the EU would allow the UK to pursue independent trade deals with countries around the world, particularly with emerging economies that the EU was not prioritising. They believe that the UK could benefit from greater economic flexibility outside the EU's trade framework.
You've got to understand that it's the working classes that have been hit the hardest by immigration, mass immigration. You know, wage compression, the change in communities over a short period of time has led to, tension within communities. You've got to appreciate that actually, it's all right to say, criticising UKIP and Nigel Farage, but actually it's the people at the bottom of society that have been hit the hardest by immigration.
If we delay Brexit for too long, if we get another referendum, we are going to tease out the right-wing and left-wing extreme elements in British politics, right? They're talking about you, aren't they?
Well, I'm not a right-wing extremist, I'm not a left-wing extremist. You've got the left-wing extremists in Commons now. You've got a Marxist, anti-Semitic Labour Party.
You did stand on a stage and talk about sexual crimes, attributing them to a religion, the religion of Islam. That's on record.
The problem is with the ideology, not individuals. I have never attacked individuals. I always talk about the ideology, and the ideology is the problem.
Tommy Robinson, though, is a man who's been to prison several times, including for mortgage fraud. He's a man who trades under aliases, and anybody who's seen him and the English Defence League outside courts knows that their message to Muslim people in this country is pretty clear. So you are choosing to associate UKIP, the party you and Nigel Farage created, with him, aren't you?
And who said this, Gerard Batten? Every single Muslim watching this, on 7/7 you got away with killing and maiming British citizens. The Islamic community will feel the full force of the English Defence League if we see any of our British citizens killed, maimed or hurt on British soil ever again.
UKIP is the authentic party of Brexit. We're the true party of Leave.
Behind Gerard Batten on stage, a selection of the candidates for an election they do not even want to happen.
Have I, to some extent in politics, continued to challenge things that are continued to be unchallengeable? Yes. Have I ever been a member of any extremist organisation, left or right? No.
Nigel Farage.
This is the single most resilient and bravest person I have ever met in my life.
The 2016 referendum saw 51.9% of voters choosing to leave, while 48.1% voted to remain. This decision set off a long and complex process, culminating in the UK's formal departure from the EU on January 31st, 2020.
Because we know that this is the single most important moment in the modern history of our great nation. That is what is happening tonight.
While the Leave campaign promised economic benefits and greater sovereignty, the reality of Brexit has led to ongoing debates about its impact on the UK's economy and global standing.
Post online, we talk about it, we vote in elections, we campaign on the streets.
Before Brexit, the far right was an ideological fringe, lurking on the outskirts of British politics, but the referendum in its chaotic, visceral nature, provided something else, an opportunity. The Leave campaign, with its emotive slogans about taking back control and reclaiming sovereignty, tapped into a deep vein of nationalism and fear. It wasn't just about economics, it wasn't just about the EU. It was about what felt like an existential threat to the identity of Britain itself.
I've been involved or at least seen what has been happening up and down the country with the hotels of asylum seekers, with the situation in the Channel, with the total inability of the British government to control its border.
Where are you from? Okay. Where have you come from?
In this environment, the right wing found fertile ground. Nigel Farage, who had spent many years on the margins, suddenly became the voice of the movement. His rhetoric, pitting ordinary people against an elite political class and invoking fears about immigration and the loss of British values, found a huge audience. The mainstream political parties, for all their talk of unity and compromise, couldn't provide the answers that people were looking for, and in the vacuum, the far right surged, promising simple, direct solutions to complex problems.
Content creators and influencers are reporting on the issue of immigration and anti-white policy making. All of a sudden, there is a palpable fear about the prospect of the UK becoming a country where the indigenous population are a minority.
But it wasn't just a UK phenomenon. Brexit, with its sharp divisions and emotional charge, was a bellwether for a wider shift happening across Europe. The European Union itself, as a project, had become an easy scapegoat. In a world of rising inequality, crumbling communities, and a sense of a future that was slipping out of grasp, the far right seized on the fear of the other, the migrant, the foreigner. They painted a picture of a Britain under siege, where traditions were under threat and culture was being erased. All of this has been propelled by an ever-increasing amount of both legal and illegal migration that has led to many British-born nationals feeling left unheard, especially when it came to concerns over terrorism, drug crime and knife crime, which many point to statistics that show large proportions of foreign-born immigrants that are offending.
What are arrest rates for foreign nationals compared to arrest rates for resident Brits? How do the numbers work? Well, finally, we've got some answers. We didn't get them, but the Centre for Migration Control did. And the figures are stark. 17.5 times more likely to be arrested for crime in this country if you come from Albania. 9 times more likely to be arrested for a crime in this country if you come from Afghanistan, and there are other countries here too, Iraq, Algeria, you name it. The truth of it is, because of the open borders policy that had been run, not just for the last 14 years under the Conservatives, but Labour before that, we are allowing criminals to freely come into Britain.
And so, as Britain lurched into the chaos of Brexit negotiations, the right grew bolder. They capitalised on the confusion, on the anger, on the loss of control. The rhetoric became sharper, more divisive. It wasn't just about leaving the EU, it was about creating a vision of Britain that was insulated, closed off and rigidly defined, where any hint of difference was seen as a threat.
Our national identity and everything it means to be British, and I'm not including paper Brits, is being taken away from us. We will not tolerate this, and we will not allow it to happen.
Every one of us here today needs to remember who we are. We are the sons and daughters of warriors, of bravehearts, of fighters. To fight is in our DNA. It's in every single one of you. It's in your children. Okay? The British are not
fears were identical, and so were our responses. That response was not without risk, but we have both learned from history that we must not allow aggression to succeed.
The media, always hungry for stories that stir emotions and drive clicks, amplified these voices. What began as a fringe issue was now embedded in the national discourse. The right had its moment in the spotlight, and it was no longer just a group of extremists at the margins. They were shaping the conversation, pushing the mainstream further to the right, and creating a new reality where their narratives of fear, division, and exclusion became increasingly normalised. The right wing wasn't just a reaction to Brexit, it was the dark side of the story, the inevitable consequence of a country torn apart by its own sense of identity and its relationship with the world. And the more chaotic and uncertain the aftermath of Brexit became, the more the far right would grow, feeding off the instability it had helped create. The English Defence League, or more commonly known as the EDL, emerged in 2009, growing rapidly to become a symbol of right-wing nationalism and anti-Islamic sentiment. It was an embodiment of a deeper cultural anxiety. The EDL was founded by Tommy Robinson, real name Stephen Yaxley Lennon. Initially, they presented themselves as a movement that was fighting against the rise of radical Islam and extremism in Britain, claiming to be standing up for the British way of life. But beneath this thin veneer of anti-extremism, the EDL was a far more dangerous cocktail. They presented themselves as the defenders of the British working class, but their rhetoric quickly took on an explicitly divisive and violent edge.
Once was buzzing every night, now the silence gives a fright.
The EDL's rise coincided with growing concerns about the changing demographics in Britain, particularly fears around Muslim communities and the visibility of Islamic cultural practices. The group's narrative was one of fear of losing British traditions, fear of being overrun by immigrants, and fear of a growing Islamic influence in the country.
In this ghost town we are bound. No one's around, the streets are bare.
They claimed that Islam, as a religion, was inherently violent and incompatible with British values. The mainstream political class, in their eyes, was either too blind or too weak to address the threat. Their street demonstrations, often marked by violent clashes with anti-fascist groups, became the EDL's signature. They used football culture as a vehicle to mobilise disillusioned working-class people. These rallies were often raucous, with chants, flags and signs promoting the idea that Britain was being taken over by outsiders.
Let me tell you something. Down at the local having my Sunday roast, reading all the headlines, getting proper gross. Politicians talking but they don't know me, sitting in their offices drinking fancy tea. Half the neighbourhood can't pay their bills while they debate about which forms to fill. Every morning, same old morning show, same old stories mate, nothing new to know. Just another day.
But here's where it gets interesting. The EDL and its rise tapped into something much bigger than Islam. It capitalised on the broader sense of alienation, frustration and disenfranchisement felt by many in working class communities across Britain. Many of these people felt abandoned by the political elites, left behind in a globalised world where their jobs were disappearing, their neighbourhoods were changing, and in their sense of national pride was being eroded.
Working class got nothing left to lose. Everyone's got something they want to say, but no one's listening anyway. Sitting at the pub with my cheap old, wonder when this ship's gonna set sail. Just another
The EDL gave them something to rally around, an enemy to blame, a sense of belonging, and a narrative that put them at the centre of a battle to save Britain. But the EDL's rhetoric and activities soon attracted the attention of counter-protesters, particularly the far left and anti-fascist groups who pushed back against their message. Over time, internal divisions began to tear the EDL apart. The group became increasingly violent, and key figures like Tommy Robinson himself eventually left in 2013 after a series of arrests and legal issues, claiming that the movement had been infiltrated by extremists. The EDL had succeeded in normalising the discourse of a far-right extremism in the UK, providing a rallying cry for other similar groups and feeding into the broader narrative of populist nationalism. In the end, the EDL wasn't just a group of the working class protesting on the streets. They were a manifestation of a deeper simmering discontent with the status quo, seeing Islam and immigration as a lightning rod for all sorts of social and political grievances. Their rise, fueled by resentment, was the beginning of a more mainstream acceptance of far-right ideas in the UK, an acceptance that would feed into the broader political currents of the next decade.
His life and hand still grip with pride the photographs of those who died in Flanders fields where poppies grow, the stories that the young should know. The last of all the Tommy boys who heard the shouts and all the noise, his eyes will shine bright, shaded blue, the last of them that always knew. When morning bells on Sunday ring, the British folks still hear him sing of battles fought still ready a more, till Tommy boys are heard no more.
Suit and a pint in hand, media darling of this wasteland, spouting rubbish on LBC, acting like you speak for me. You're just a proper muppet, mate, selling snake oil at any rate. Bang on about the glory days, while working class gets sold. Schoolboy playing working class, trading futures made of broken glass. Down the pub with your banker mates, planning how to raise the rates. Up the rock. You're just a proper muppet, mate, selling snake oil at any rate. Bang on about the glory days, while working class gets sold away.
Then there's the rise of right-wing TV and radio channels in the UK that is a fascinating reflection of a broader shift in the mainstream media. It's a moment when traditional media, already under pressure from new digital platforms, began to witness a surge in populist, opinion-driven programming, a shift that would come to define much of the political discourse. Piers Morgan's move to Good Morning Britain was a key moment. His brand of brash, unapologetic commentary, mixed with a slick, media-savvy persona, was a deliberate attempt to make daytime TV more combative, more real. Morgan brought with him a populist style that resonated with a large portion of the audience, those who were tired of the bland centrist middle ground. He was direct and provocative.
Look around and see the world today.
Have a home in this country.
I believe we need to protect the British public right now.
What's the answer to the question?
Changes coming like the morning sun, always fading one by one.
But Morgan was more than just a media figure. His appearance marked the beginning of a growing trend where mainstream media outlets started embracing more populist right-wing viewpoints. The key moment came with the rise of political correctness as a target for right-wing pundits. For Morgan, attacking woke culture became part of his TV persona, and the media landscape began to shift. Good Morning Britain started inviting more divisive right and left-wing commentators, and Morgan himself became a regular voice against what he described as the overreach of progressive values. His confrontational style, often playing on the culture wars over issues like Brexit, identity politics and political correctness, made for good TV ratings. This shift didn't just stop at ITV. The broader media environment began to open up to voices that were more sceptical of liberal values and more attuned to the anxieties of working class voters. Morgan's influence extended beyond Good Morning Britain. His fame and social media presence made him a key figure in popularising right-wing talking points, particularly in the context of Brexit, immigration and national identity. His commentary began to mirror the language of the populist right that was rising in politics, and his show became a platform for pushing this narrative to a mainstream audience. Following this, the emergence of more right-wing channels became inevitable. Channels like GB News, launched in 2021, and Talk Radio explicitly positioned themselves as counterpoints to what they described as the liberal mainstream media. GB News in particular was seen as an attempt to create an equivalent to Fox News in the UK, a channel that catered to a conservative, often anti-establishment audience, with a mix of culture war debates, anti-woke sentiment, and outspoken hosts like Nigel Farage. It became a space where Britain's growing populist sentiment could be amplified, serving as an echo chamber for right-wing opinions and a platform for inflammatory, often sensationalist views. These platforms capitalised on a number of dynamics that were shaping the UK. First, they recognised the growing discontent with the liberal elite, particularly in the wake of Brexit, when large sections of the population felt alienated by what they saw as the political establishment's disregard for their concerns. Second, they leaned into the language of grievance and victimhood, portraying conservatives as being silenced by a progressive elite. The argument was simple. The left had taken control of the narrative, and it was time for conservative voices to reclaim the spotlight. The success of these outlets also reflects the broader trend of media fragmentation. People were no longer just watching traditional state-run BBC or mainstream ITV. Instead, they were gravitating towards platforms that spoke directly to their anxieties and frustrations. providing not just news, but affirmation of their worldview. The rise of social media, particularly Twitter and YouTube, gave right-wing commentators a platform to bypass traditional media and speak directly to their audience. Personalities like Morgan were able to amplify their views across multiple platforms, from TV to social media to newspaper columns. This grew increasingly worse, according to left-leaning voters, when Elon Musk purchased Twitter, changing the company to what is now known as X. By the time Morgan left Good Morning Britain in 2021, following his infamous departure after storming off the set over Meghan Markle's interview with Oprah, the UK media had already been irrevocably changed. Morgan had become a symbol of the populist media movement, someone who could inflame culture wars and rile up the masses, but also someone who was embraced by a large section of the public who saw him as a truth teller fighting against the liberal agenda. In summary, the rise of right-wing TV and radio channels in the UK since Piers Morgan joined Good Morning Britain reflects a deeper shift within the media. It's about the transformation of traditional outlets into platforms that amplify populist, often divisive narratives, shifting the national conversation away from nuanced, fact-based reporting and towards sensationalism, culture wars and ideological polarisation. Channels like GB News and Talk Radio are simply the latest evolution of this trend, providing a media space where the concerns of a certain segment of the population are validated and amplified in a world increasingly defined by ideological tribalism.
Rape gang scandal has now become a global scandal, which it always ought to have been. Elon Musk has amplified very grim details of a truly horrifying case and a horrifying cover-up to millions of new people. And whether you agree with him or not, or his methods or his rhetoric, there's no denying that he's raised some very difficult questions, which are now being properly asked. And there are questions too about Elon Musk. There are questions about Tommy Robinson. There are questions about Islam and about Islamophobia. Does it even exist?
The grooming gang scandal in the UK, particularly the cases of organised child sexual exploitation, has been a highly charged and deeply controversial issue. Its impact on anti-Muslim sentiment is complex, as the media, political discourse, and public perception have all played significant roles in how the scandal has shaped attitudes towards Muslims in general. The cases, notably in towns like Rotherham, Rochdale and Oxford, involve groups of men exploiting thousands of young girls, many of whom were white, for sex. While these cases were absolutely horrific and rightly led to criminal convictions, much of the media coverage, especially in the wake of investigative reports, focused on the ethnicity and religion of the perpetrators, who were often identified as Pakistani Muslims. The media's emphasis on the cultural and religious backgrounds of the men involved created an association in the minds of many people between these crimes and the broader Muslim community. Another issue that has emerged in the aftermath of the scandal is the idea of Muslim silence. Critics have argued that many Muslims, particularly religious and community leaders, have been slow to speak out against the grooming gangs or to address the issue head-on. This silence, or perceived silence, has been interpreted by some as complicity or an unwillingness to confront the problem within the Muslim community. Robinson's use of the grooming gang scandal has been controversial and highly divisive. He has been accused of using the suffering of victims for political gain while fostering anti-Muslim sentiment. This narrative has been used by the media as a tool to silence Tommy and in a way to create a monster, one that the liberal elites could despise. In 2018, Tommy Robinson filmed himself outside a courthouse during the trial of a grooming gang in Leeds and streamed it live on social media. His actions led to his arrest and later imprisonment for contempt of court, but it also gained him a significant following among those who saw him as a champion of free speech and a fighter against the Islamisation of Britain. As the old certainties of the world continue to disintegrate, we are caught in the throes of a new conflict. The far right, whose promise of order through fear, identity, and nationalism has found a new life in the uncertainty of the times. Our world is one of fractured narratives, where truth no longer seems to matter, only the story we choose to tell ourselves. And so we find ourselves in a perilous game, one where misinformation and manipulation churn like a storm, ready to sweep away entire societies in its wake. And yet, beneath this chaos, something crucial remains: the possibility of change. The question isn't just about whether we can avoid catastrophic events, but whether we can change our relationship to power. Whether we can once again find a way to trust each other, to dismantle the systems that have held us captive for so long, and to reclaim a sense of shared purpose before it's too late. The forces are already in motion. The far right continues to rise ever more, stronger and with more valid points. The far left, though determined, risks tearing itself apart in its search for purity. But in doing so, it seems to be closing off its own future and not addressing the very issues that the right point to. The path ahead is unclear, the future fragmented, and perhaps, like the world itself, we are too fractured to see a way out. Perhaps the question isn't whether we can steer clear of a global conflict, it's whether we can ever rebuild a world that is capable of peace, or whether we are simply on a collision course with ourselves, locked in a loop of repeating the same mistakes over and over again. Our message isn't one that's meant to bash any one side, but more an attempt to try and make sense and to make the viewers stop and think about what's actually occurring.
The really feeble approach of the centrist politicians, who don't speak to people's needs, don't help people solve their problems, and when the fascists say stop the boats, a Labour government says stop the boats as well.
And what are the political parallels now then?
The parallel is on that situation of developing crisis. It's only just beginning. So only just beginning to feel the effects of that, it having been masked so long. But in that developing crisis, the government of the day does precisely what it did before. That is, coming in on a socialist or advanced program, it takes over at once the position of its opponents and applies conservative policies, even more conservative than the policies of the Conservative Party.